This is from a previous class. We have some Lambda functions that are integrating with our baseball stats Dynamo database. Okay, so one of them is all stats, where I'm just going to get all of the information. We can look at this function. And if I look, basically what's happening is we're connecting to US East 2, and we're scanning the entire table, baseball stats, and getting all the data and returning that data. Okay, I can blow up the font a little bit. Okay, and we have a test event, so if I want to test this, I should be able to see those baseball stats records. Okay, so it succeeded. We get all of these items, which are all of the baseball stats. It's a scan of the entire table. Right, so there's 27 records after we've added new. So I think the initial seed data included 24 records. We've added a few additional records. So we're seeing that there's 27 records in the table. Then we also have another function called new team. New team takes some input data. It takes this event object, and it grabs that as the item, and it inserts it into the database. So inserts it into the baseball stats table. If we look at the test event, you'll see that I'm inserting the Milwaukee Brewers. So it's taking that team and inserting it as a new item in the table. So it's taking the entire event as my item that I'm inserting into the table. So I could use this function for teams, I could use it for players, I could use it for games. I'm taking whatever you pass me and I'm saying let's insert that into the baseball stats table. That's what's happening right now. And the way the test event handler is set up is I'm passing a new team. Okay, but it certainly could be a player, it certainly could be a game. And I'm not doing any validation or anything like that. I'm assuming that I'm getting good data at this point. Okay, so we have those two functions that are then mapped over an API gateway. So I have, if I'm looking at my APIs, I have a baseball stats API. So I'm going into that baseball stats API. The resource that I'm using, so the resource that I'm using is just on the root. And I have two methods set up, a get and a post. So two HTTP verbs set up. The get right now is mapped to all stats. I can test it. And you can see that I'm getting those same 27 records that I was getting before in Lambda. Okay, so life's good there. And then the post. We're setting up post so that it's mapped to the new team function. So right now there's a function that's going to insert a new team. We have the API gateway set up for that. And then if I test that right now, I can decide what my request body is going to be. So I could put that team information in there so that JSON object to create a new instance of a team would then map to that new team, which would then get inserted into my baseball stats table. And I see some of you looking at me like you have confused faces. This is really what you're going to be doing for Project 2. Right? And we had looked at that client application that's connected to this. So this is what you're doing for Project 2. What I want to do today is I want to secure this. So if I'm looking on my desktop, I think I have the Project 2 sample. So I get the teams. So Madison Mallards are here. And then I get all of the players, and I'm ignoring the games right now. And I can add new teams if I want to. So if I want to add a new team, let's say I wanted to add, I don't know. Let's add the, I think they might already be in here. No, yeah, they are. The Timber Rattlers. Okay, so my team ID will be Appleton Timber Rattlers. My sort key will be Appleton Timber Rattlers. Okay, I eventually add the team. Eventually I'll get confirmation saying, yep, it was added, and then they show up here in this list. Okay, so I'm able to add those teams. Anyone can right now. So if I gave you the API URL, you could use my API URL and life would be good. You'd be set. I would be paying for your usage. Okay, and I don't want to do that. I want to set it up so that my client has access, I have access, but anyone else that tries to access my application is going to get denied access. Okay, that's how I want to set this up. Okay, so I'm going back over to API Gateway, and if I go to API keys, see the API keys? I need to create an API key. My name is going to be Brian's API key. I can name it whatever I want. I'm going to auto-generate it, and then I can provide a description. This is the API key used for the class demo accessing the baseball stats API. Okay, so I need to add a usage plan to this. The usage plan basically defines, so let's back up a second. So let's say I'm a customer of this API. I've decided to pay. I'm paying for access. I could decide that you can do whatever you want. You have unlimited access. Or I could say that there's different tiers. You can access it 1,000 times a day, or 10,000 times a day, or 10,000 times a month. Whatever that usage plan is, that's what we're talking about here. Is what level of service am I willing to provide? How much access do you get? Okay, so I'm going to add a usage plan. So I'm just going to call it my basic usage plan. Why am I not seeing any usage plans? I need a usage plan and I don't have one. Why do I not have one? So it used to be that usage plans and your API keys were all connected. So here I have to go back out to the usage plans. They've moved it into two separate categories. So the API keys and usage plans are two separate categories. I'm going to create my usage plan now. Here I'm going to name it my baseball stats API basic usage plan. The rate, number of requests per second, I'll say 10 and 10. I'm going to enable throttling quota, so let's say 1,000 a month. These are low, but maybe I call this my free usage plan. Okay. Now I have to add a stage to the usage plan. So is this on the developer tier or the production tier? So I'm just going to pick that stage. I only have one stage. Okay, and then I can add an API key to the usage plan. I could do this in either place. I could either do that in the API keys or from the usage plans. This all used to be one screen integrated together, but I'm going to add an API key to the usage plan. I am actually going to do it from the API keys because I don't know what the API key is. So now I have an API key that can make up to 1,000 requests a month. That's the way I've defined it. 10 per second, but only 1,000 per month. And then I'm going to grab that API key. Okay. So far, so good. Okay, so here's the API key. I'm just going to copy it to my clipboard. I'll eventually delete the API key, but so I have the API key on my clipboard, and now I want to create a client application that's going to access my API. Okay, so a couple of things that are going to go on here. I first want to show you how we can test this, right? Before I start writing code, so I'm going to write my client application in JavaScript code. Before I can write that JavaScript code, I want to verify that my API is now working with that API key. And it's way easier if I don't try to write my client application without knowing whether this works or not. So the tool that I use is Postman. It's a Chrome tool, Chrome add-on. It's a standalone application now. So if I do Postman, this is the tool. I already have it installed. It used to be just a Chrome app, but now it's a standalone application. This is it right here. I don't really need the native app. I'm not going to use any of their templates. I'm going to clear all of my history. Okay, and what I want to do is I need to keep track of what my API key is, and then I also need the URL to my service. So I want to fix this. So the way I want to handle it is I want to do an HTTP GET, and I want to do that to my API endpoint. Okay, so my API endpoint is going to be based on, if I go to my stages, here's my endpoint. Okay, so if I try to go to that URL right now, I don't think I should have got it. I don't think I've deployed it to require the API key yet. I lie. I think I did. So if I go back to my resources and I go to the GET, right here in the method request, API key required is equal to false. I want to change that. And then I want to do the same thing for post. And I get to pick and choose which HTTP verbs are secure, right? So maybe I'm giving you read access and you're not paying for that, but if you want to create something or delete something or update something, then I might secure it with an API key, right? So it just authorized users. Okay, so that's saved. And then I'm going to do the same thing for post. In the method request, the API key is going to be required. And then once I've made that change, I have to deploy this. So deploy those changes. Okay, so now I'm on that stage. Now I want to hit that URL. I already have it up here. So if I refresh it, eventually, once it's not cached, I wonder if I bring it over to Safari. Yeah, why is that still caching that? I don't want that cached. I don't think it should allow me to see this, but I also think it's just cached right now. History, clear history. Still grabbing it. Why am I seeing that data? I don't think I should. I think I should get an unauthorized exception. I just want to make sure I have the right URL. Well, that's fun. For some reason that's not saved, and I don't know why. Okay, that is required. So I must not have checked it. So when I'm in the method request for the GET, you saw it was false for requiring the API key. So when I changed it, I didn't confirm it. I thought I did, but apparently I didn't. We'll have to go back to video replay. But, okay, so the API key should be required. That was only on the GET. The post was set up fine. But when I'm accessing that URL from a browser, I'm accessing it via a GET. So that was the test that I was running. Is my GET configured correctly? It wasn't, right? So now I'm going to deploy it. Okay, now if I hit this URL, one more time, come on. What a crappy demo, huh? I'm confident this will work. There we go. So I finally cleared the history, and now I'm getting a forbidden message. Okay? So I was able to access it before I had the API key, and now that I have the API key there, I've cleared the history, so it's not caching that result. Now it's saying, hey, you have to go back to the service and actually get new data, and now I'm getting that forbidden message. I don't really want to do that with my Chrome history. So for now, I have it cached, and now it's finally refreshed saying it's forbidden. I can't access it because I'm not providing an API key. Okay, so I want to take this URL, and I want to bring it over to Postman. Okay, and I should see that same error in Postman. If I send this request, you'll see I get the message forbidden. I'm doing an HTTP GET, sending the request. But what I want to do is I want to send an API key over to the service so that the API gateway will authorize me to actually use that service. Okay, so let's go into the headers, and you'll see this X API key. I added that. Okay, so this one's not needed. I always set the content type to JSON whenever I'm accessing an API key or an API. But then this API key I had added from a previous demo, probably to test project 2. Okay, so this is the wrong API key. I'm going to go back to API Gateway to get my API key. And then I can go back into Postman, and I'm going to paste in the correct API key. So the key name is x-api-key. You just have to know that. That's not pulled from a drop-down list. There's no drop-down list here. Okay, so x-api key is a keyword. It's an HTTP header variable that we can use. And that's what the API gateway checks to see, are you providing the API gateway's API key? So now I send this with the correct API key, and now you'll notice I'm getting the data back. It's required. Okay. Let's test the post. Okay, the post is a little bit more difficult to test. Okay, so this is still the same endpoint, right? But I want to insert a new team. And if I go back to the project 2, the way this looks is I have to specify a team ID, a sort key, and a team name as a JSON object. That's what I have to send to the server. And I have to send it via an HTTP post, not a GET. So I can't do that directly in the browser without quite a bit of work. What I can do is I can pick my HTTP verb here. So I want to handle a post to that API gateway endpoint. I still want the content type. I still want the API key. That's going to be in my headers variable. But then the body, I need some data here. So not this stuff. I want my baseball team stuff. And I can kind of see what it should be. I should have a team ID. I should have a sort key. And then I should have a team name. Those are the things that I need. And I'll blow up the font. So I have a JSON object for all of this. So the team ID, I'm going to make it team info underscore Reds. And then my sort key is going to be the Reds. And then my team name is going to be the Cincinnati Reds. And I need commas after all of these, so I have valid JSON. Couple of things with this tool. I need to be saying that this is just raw data, and then the data type is going to be JSON over here. I don't want form data. I don't want form URL encoded data. I don't want binary data. Like, I'm sending JSON to my service. That's what's going in the request body. So the request body has my actual data for a new team, and then the headers have my API key. I'm handling it via an HTTP post, and then I can send the request. It's taking a second, thinking about it, and I get an empty object back, which is my confirmation saying, yep, that was successful. And I can see it if I go back. So here's my history. I should see that new object if I send that previous request again. Eventually, you should see that there's 28 records. There's 29 because I must have inserted something else. Oh, I inserted the Timber Rattlers. Here's the Reds, though. That was the team I just inserted. So nothing really new, except now I have to integrate my API key. Okay, so I don't necessarily want to write my client application against this service. Like, I feel like it's a different class. However, some of you are in the advanced JavaScript class. It probably fits in pretty well there. What I would suggest is if we go look at the client application that you're going to have for project 2. So I add a project folder. I'm going to my desktop. Here's the sample application. I'm going to blow up the font so we can actually take a look. So right now, I fetch via a post, and I'm taking the parameters. So the team ID, the sort key, the team name. That's how I'm adding a new team. That's what's required. That's what I'm sending in. That HTTP body. The headers, I know that I'm going to need an X API key with some value. It's pretty easy, right? Has to come along with the request. Otherwise, the request will fail because now my API requires that API key. I guess before I run this, before I actually modify this, I just want to show you that it's not working anymore. Okay, so if I go back over to my application and I try to run this, I don't have very good exception handling. I told you that, right? With the client application, if I go inspect it and I look at my console, it tells me I have a CORS error, which is kind of a dumb error. That's not what's going on here. Okay? It's not. That's not the actual error. What's happening is I'm failing to fetch, and I think if I drill in, it would tell me somewhere. I thought at some point I could drill in far enough to see that I'm getting blocked by that API key policy. Okay. So what I need to do is, my application's obviously broken. I'm not loading teams. I'm not loading players. I wouldn't be able to add new teams. So my client application's broken at this point. So what I want to do is, if I go back to the client application, in the headers, I can specify this X API key. And then I'm going to need that same thing, the headers. And I guess I'll need the method too. So I'm going to grab this. In the initial request, when I get all of the stats and load them and output the teams and I output the players, right now I'm just fetching the URL and I don't have any additional parameters with it. I want to fetch the URL, which is the global variable. I want to do that with a get. I'm not passing a body, but I am passing headers. I don't know what it doesn't like about that. I don't think it likes the quotes around my... And I'm using the Prettier plugin. It doesn't like the content type being that way either. I'm going to quote it. I'm pretty confident that the quotes are fine. Okay, so now I've done that. I've added the API key to both of those requests. Still doesn't look good. Unexpected token. So it's telling me it's wrong. So my fetch is here. This object right here is the problem. So see how I have this opening curly brace, and I have another opening curly brace, and then I only have one closing curly brace? So I don't have matching curly braces, so there's my matching curly braces. Life's good. Okay, so now I try this again, and now my client application's back up and running. I'm able to fetch, passing along the API key from my client application. Okay, so it's fairly easy to integrate. I just have to pass those header variables. It's not easy to test if you write it from scratch, though. Like, so if I'm writing it from scratch, it's like, Like, that's why I use Postman. Before I start worrying about, is it working in JavaScript or not, Postman is probably my go-to resource for testing these APIs. And it's really nice. It gives you a full history of what you've done in the past. I can use any HTTP verb, so as I build up my API and I integrate the delete method and the update method, like, this is the tool that I use to test it. And I use this tool as opposed to the API gateway test because I'm outside of their ecosystem, so I get to see, is CORS enabled? Right, that cross-origin resource sharing? Am I going to be able to access this from some other destination other than AWS? This will tell me that. I'm on my own machine. So any HTTP verb with any options that I want to send, this is the tool that I use to do it, to make sure things are wired up correctly. Okay, so I think the API keys are one of the easier things, like in terms of understanding. As far as how we integrate it into our app, like that's kind of a different story. So like I said, I like to use Postman to do it. But you're free to build out a client application like we did in JavaScript or some other application where I can pass request headers. It's just generally not as easy. Okay, but you do have a sample application, so all you're doing is modifying the header so that you have the API key in place if you want to test it out yourself. Okay. Questions on this? And you saw me missing stuff, right? Like there's about 10 steps that I got to touch, so it's pretty easy to miss things, but it's also pretty easy to test. It's pretty visual. What I would suggest is make sure you try it on a browser where you haven't accessed the service before, so you're not running into caching issues. Caching issues are pretty hard to debug. Am I getting the cached version of the API response, or am I actually getting a new response from the API? It's really tough to tell sometimes, unless you want to delete your whole browser history. I don't use Safari, so I don't really care. I hate doing it in Chrome because it signs me out of applications and I've forgotten passwords and stuff like that. And that's what I use as kind of my personal browser. So then if I clear my history, I'm like, I don't remember my password and I got to recover everything. So that's the reason for me not clearing my browser history in Chrome. Okay, I'm going to